Good afternoon, church. Coming to you from my office today here in Juno Beach at the church on the campus. I'm looking out the window at a mostly rainy day with a somewhat rainy spirit too, but hopefully to bring a message of hope and encouragement to follow Jesus. So the title of the sermon is The Other Side of the Lake. And if we're going to follow Jesus, we got to understand where he's going. It's his encounter with his disciples where he invites them to go to the other side of the lake. And right now I have a short video with a low-tech version of my map to show you what it meant for them to follow Jesus to the other side of the lake, the end of the chapter 4 of Mark, very end of that. And so the passage we will start with today happens after that. Okay, so we're looking right now at Palestine in the time of Jesus. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see that's the Sea of Galilee. And you see Capernaum is up here at the top. There's my giant finger. Capernaum, and this is where Jesus is for the beginning of Mark. He is around this section of the lake here at the top, and he is in the temple. He is with the fishermen by the seaside for chapters 2 and chapter 3. He goes to the synagogue. Well, I said the synagogue maybe already in there, and there's talk of the Sabbath. So in this part of Mark's gospel, from the very beginning, Jesus is with his tribe. He's with his people. He is among the Jews, among the people of the town. He's not really among the elite Jews. He's among the fishermen and the different people that he encounters. And the crowds are gathered by the Sea of Galilee. Now, at the end of the 4th chapter of Mark, Jesus says, let's go to the other side of the lake. Now, if you look, this is the Decapolis. This is the other side of the lake. And you'll see down here is Gerasa. That's the town, with the region of the Gerasenes. And that's the beginning of our passage for today, that Jesus and his disciples went to the region of the Gerasenes. And what you're looking at is this traverse from Capernaum to the region of the Gerasenes is like going into another world entirely. Jesus is taking them on a journey outside, way outside of their comfort zone, and everything that he's been in Mark's gospel up to this point gets turned on his head when he says, let us go to the other side of the lake. Of course, there's a storm, and he calms the storm. And then at the beginning of chapter 5, we find our passage for today. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. And he shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus has said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demon begged Jesus, "Send us among these pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending to the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told them about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. We see him tell everyone everywhere, keep it a secret. But this guy, he says, go tell it on the mountain, how he has had mercy on you, so that people will know God treats them with mercy. Then maybe they would treat one another with mercy. By this passage, we are taught to show mercy. By many others in the gospel, we are taught to show mercy. To get to the place where this mercy miracle can happen, though, Jesus and the disciples with him had to go to the other side of the lake. They had to leave their tight-knit group of what is known and familiar to them to travel across the lake to the godless city of the Decapolis. Rob Bell says, Spirit often takes you into new places and spaces. This is essential to the spiritual life, whether it's a gnawing dissatisfaction with the way things are, or maybe the way that you were brought up to behave, think, and observe the world around you. It ceases to work like it used to. The spiritual life is what calls us to go beyond the familiar and into what looks like to us to be foreign and godless lands sometimes, across the lake, there on the other side. We have to leave the familiar in order to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. We need to learn from other previously silenced voices. We need to listen. When we want to defend the way things used to be, listen. White Americans will never know what it feels like to be Black in America. And so for the most part, don't get the anger, frustration, the deep, inescapable pain. What we have now in our country is enough is enough. George Floyd's death was the proverbial straw that where all the brokenness, along with the waiting under the surface, all the brokenness that was waiting under the surface came out. The mercy needed to be applied 4 centuries ago. So where do we go from here? I don't have a good answer for that. I don't think it's my place to speak that into the world. For mercy's sake, we let those whose voices have been silenced for so long speak. We give space for those voices and we listen. We try to learn as much as we can about what it means and what it's meant to be Black in America. For all of us, no matter what color we are. But for white people in particular, we don't. insert ourselves into the conversation to assuage our fears, our guilt, our pain, our misunderstandings. We listen. Listen. Don't approach someone with the expectation that a person of color owes you an explanation. And if you don't have an idea of where to start learning and listening, grab Google. Look up anti-racism, white supremacy. Just simply, what can white people do? Why is being colorblind bad? Just type in these numbers, 1619. See what comes up. We can do something. But if you watch all the disturbing images on your TV news, sitting on your hands doing nothing, well, there you are. And Jesus says, okay, we've been here for a while, and tonight we're going to go across the lake to the other side. They were probably shocked when he said that. Like, what? Why do you want to do that? Jesus calls his disciples, brings his disciples with him, and that's intentional. And we want to be Jesus' disciples. We have to follow him to the other side of the lake in his unknown territory. Get out of our comfort zones. Be uncomfortable. Came across something back in February I've been sort of holding on to, and I feel like it's appropriate now. The late Reverend Dr. James Cone, liberation theologian, died in 2018. It came through on the news that I pay attention to, so I knew that when it happened. But the reason why he was on my radar to begin with was because he came to school to speak when I was in seminary. It was quite an affair. We were so honored. Having studied Cone in systematic theology, I naively thought that every student of theology knew about Cone's writing and thought. 20 years later, I've just realized his books are not part of graduate level theology courses the world over. I used a significant quote from Cone's book, God of the Oppressed, to introduce my Christology and my ordination paperwork, basically my personal manifesto on who I believe Jesus Christ to be. Cone was my guide for this. He was like Paul Tillich, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Karl Barth. The only difference is at school we got to meet him. And someday if you ask me, I'll tell you some of the anecdotes from that. So I just assumed any preacher in any church who went to seminary would have read Cone. I was under this assumption for 20 years, give or take. Lately, very recently, I've discovered that the Christian church, well, let's qualify it, the predominantly white Christian church, has never heard of him. So when I read in my daily devotional online, Thursday, February 13th, 2020, James Cone is one of the greatest American theologians of this past century. Yet sadly, many Christians have never heard of him. I said to myself, well, that's not going to be my many Christians. And I realized that I haven't used a lot of Cone specifically in preaching or teaching. Jesus' teaching is what empowered Reverend Dr. James Cone to write these words. Any message that is not related to the liberation of the poor in a society is not Christ's message. Any message that is not related to the liberation of the poor in a society is not Christ's message. Who is Jesus if not liberator? Why born in this way? Why at this particular time in history in this place? Why died in such a way? What is all that social change and miraculous healing and eating with the wrong people and helping out on the Sabbath and proclaiming release to the captives? What is all that about if Jesus is just someone to walk in the garden with? In today's passage, Jesus liberates this man who's got these demons. There's so much symbolism in the healing miracle here. The region that they were in a few years earlier experienced massacres. We read this from the historian Josephus. So under the boot of the Roman Empire that stomps this region of the Decapolis, they killed all these people to respond to some type of uprising, some type of disturbance or revolt. So in the wake of this disaster and trauma, there's a man living in the tombs. His demon is called Legion, a name that calls back to the Roman occupation. Do you see how the mercy message needs to be shared to the people that have known disaster and violence? So knowing this about this community, they cross the lake to this godless and trauma-ridden place. In today's passage, Jesus calls us to cross the lake, to try to do something to learn about what it means to be on the other side. In today's passage, he's not walking in the garden with you or me. He has taken his disciples to the other side of the lake. Are we going to follow him? Are we going to go with him? Are we going to travel to the other side of the lake, to the foreign land, to see and learn what mercy can do? Or are we going to sit on our hands and stay where we are? Trinity Sunday. I would encourage you to, as God of creation works around you in nature and in the familiar faces that you might see, to think about the Holy Spirit, which, while it is a comforter, is also what draws us in to new and expanding places. Because when we learn these things from Jesus, the Holy Spirit will come among us to be with us, to guide us out, to more learning, to more listening, to putting ourselves aside, and to expanding our hearts. This is what it means to follow Jesus to the other side of the lake. Will you follow him?